Okay, now I'm going to start on muscle, the last big major topic of the semester. And we're actually going to cover two chapters here, one muscle system, one muscle tissue. But the muscle system chapter is going to just be a very short part, and there won't be any connect assignment for that. But mainly the big chapter we're going to do is chapter 10 on muscle tissue. The muscle system chapter just talks about the overall functions of muscle and characteristic muscles and their basic gross anatomy. So when we get into muscle systems, we look first at this is slide number 2, functions of muscle. Obviously, what does muscle do? It contracts, it generates tension, and allows movement. It also allows us to stand up and be stable. The control of body openings and passageways, sphincters, and internal muscular tubes, and then also heat production. Um, we might find out that muscle burns a lot of ATP and produces a lot of heat. And the universal characteristics of muscle, it's excitable. So it's just like nerve in a sense. Nerve and muscle are both excitable. They action potentials can be generated. And then conductivity, they can be conducted along the membrane of the of muscle. Uh, Contractility, obviously muscle contracts. Extensibility, muscle can extend as well as contract. And elasticity, it's elastic. It's like stretching a rubber band. So these are all universal characteristics of all the types of muscle. And there are three basic types: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. We'll be talking a little bit about cardiac, not too much, because next semester you'll have a whole chapter on the heart. Talk a little bit about smooth, but mostly this chapter is about skeletal muscle. Okay, this is chapter 3. It should say muscle system up there, not muscle tissue. Muscle anatomy, it's a bundle of bundles of bundles. We're going to look up what these are in the next slide. Myofilaments make up a myofibril. A bundle of myofibrils make up a muscle cell. A bundle of muscle cells make up a fascicle. And then a bundle of fascicles makes up a whole muscle. And then we'll also look at the connective tissue coverings. The endomysium around each fiber, the perimysium around each fascicle, and the epimysium around the entire muscle. And the fascia is connective tissue that separates muscle from each other. And it's probably dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, so slide 4 shows your entire muscle and this bundle of bundles of bundles. So every little muscle fiber is a muscle cell, which is a long multinucleate cylinder cell, and we call it muscle fiber. The muscle fibers are arranged in bundles that are called fascicles. And then the fascicles are arranged in bundles of fascicles that make up the entire muscle. And then around, as I said, the muscle fiber is the endomysium. Around the fascicle is the perimysium, and around the entire muscle is the epimysium. And this is a connective tissue layer, probably dense, irregular. And then fascia on the outside, and the fascia on the outside becomes a tendon and attaches um, muscle to bone. We're going to learn a little bit about tendons also, and tendons attach muscle to bone. Okay, muscle attachments, we're too much about this. Mostly, they're what we call indirect attachments. The fascia becomes the tendon that attaches the muscle to bone. Sometimes it's direct, which means the epimysium joins with the perimysium in the bone. That's not that important. Aponeurosis is a broad layer of dense regular connective tissue rather than a cylindrical tendon. It's a broad tendon. And a ranaculum is just some fascia that covers an aponeurosis. These are not that important. What's more important is origins and insertions. So skeletal muscles are attached to two different bones. One is called the origin, one is called the insertion. Whereas attached to the origin, that doesn't move. The insertion is the bone is the attachment that actually moves a part of bone. So there's always an origin and insertion for every skeletal muscle. So functional groups. Sometimes there are a couple different muscles that that work the same way. These are called synergists. They do the exact same thing. One of them is called prime mover, which is the more important, or the agonist. Another one is secondary. We'll give you some examples of these later on. Antagonist, so there are always muscles that are skeletal muscles that work in antagonistic pairs. Because if you move a bone in one direction by contracting a muscle, you got to be able to move the bone in the other direction. So there has to be an antagonist on the other side of the bone that moves it in the opposite way. So skeletal muscles always exist in antagonistic pairs. Could be one or more muscles that pull in one way, could be synergists, but there's always an antagonist. It's not always synergist, but there's always an antagonist. And a fixator just holds a bone in place. Like your scapula in the back, there are muscles that just hold in place because this serves as an anchor for moving your whole arm. Okay, so slide 6, innervation. That means skeletal muscle is innervated, attached to a motor neuron, whose axons make up spinal nerves or cranial nerves. And we're going to find out that skeletal muscles are slaves to their motor neurons. They don't do anything unless a motor neuron tells them to contract. And these skeletal muscles do one of two things: they contract or they relax. Blood flow is highly variable, the most highly variable of all blood flow in the body. If you're not using the muscles, you're just going to bring a small amount of blood to keep the cells alive. But if you're really using the muscle, you got to bring a lot of blood. So it's really variable. And it all depends upon the size of the arteries and arterioles that are going to these particular muscles. In naming muscles, we're not going to get into too much about how we name muscles, usually about how they move, what they call extension, or flexion, or what part of the skeleton they move, or sometimes what their anatomy looks like, whether there's more than one origins or insertions.